episode 107, titled IDS/IPS Signatures, What to Automate and What to Constrain, we frame signatures as patterns that drive alerts or blocks, because the exam tends to test whether you understand how signature-based controls become operational decisions. Intrusion detection systems and intrusion prevention systems, often shortened to IDS and IPS after first mention, use signatures and behavior rules to identify traffic that matches known bad patterns, but what you do with that match depends on your tolerance for disruption and your confidence in the signal. Signatures are powerful because they turn attacker behavior into something a system can recognize quickly, yet they can also become dangerous when they are treated as infallible and pushed into block mode without validation. The practical mindset is to automate what is high confidence and repeatable, and to constrain what is ambiguous or likely to create false positives. When you can explain that balance clearly, you are aligned with both exam expectations and real-world operations. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to the CloudNetX books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Signatures detect known exploit behavior and suspicious payloads by matching patterns in traffic that correspond to widely understood attack attempts. Some signatures look for specific byte sequences associated with exploit payloads, while others look for protocol anomalies, scanning behaviors, or request patterns that have strong correlation with malicious activity. The benefit is speed, because once a signature exists, the system can identify repeated attempts quickly without needing complex analysis each time. Signatures also support consistency, because the same pattern will trigger the same response across many sensors, which helps with coordinated defense and reporting. The limitation is that signatures are only as good as their coverage and specificity, because an overly broad signature can match legitimate business traffic, and an outdated signature may miss modern variants. The exam generally expects you to understand both sides, where signatures are highly effective for known attacks, but require governance to avoid becoming noise or disruption. Enabling broad detection first is a sensible approach because it lets you understand baseline noise and traffic patterns before you turn signatures into enforcement. Broad detection means you allow the system to alert on a wide set of signatures, capturing what it would flag in your environment without actually blocking traffic. This produces a realistic view of what types of matches are common, which services trigger the most alerts, and which rules correlate with true risk versus harmless behavior. Baseline noise matters because every environment has quirks, such as unusual application behaviors, non-standard protocols, or legacy services that resemble exploit patterns in some ways. The exam tends to reward the concept of detection first because it shows operational maturity and protects availability while you learn. When you start with broad detection, you create a feedback loop that supports tuning rather than jumping immediately to enforcement. Restricting automatic blocks to high-confidence signatures is the safer way to use intrusion prevention because it reduces the probability of false positives causing outages. High-confidence signatures are those with strong specificity, where a match is very likely to represent malicious intent, such as a well-known exploit payload targeting a public-facing service. Automatic blocks should be narrow in scope, targeting critical entry points and high-risk exposures, because that is where the security benefit is highest and where you can validate behavior more effectively. The exam expects you to understand that blocking is a risk decision, because the cost of a false positive can be immediate business disruption, especially if the blocked traffic is part of a critical workflow. Restricting blocks also means you can monitor the effectiveness of each blocked signature, confirming that it reduces attack traffic without breaking legitimate use. When you treat block mode as selective, you prevent the common failure where intrusion prevention is disabled after causing too much disruption. False positives are the central operational challenge because they undermine trust and can directly harm availability when signatures are used for blocking. A false positive alert creates noise that responders eventually ignore, which means real alerts can be missed, while a false positive block interrupts legitimate sessions and can create user-facing outages. Tuning is the discipline that protects availability by refining signatures, adjusting thresholds, and applying exceptions that are narrow and documented rather than broad and permanent. Tuning also improves detection quality because it reduces alert fatigue, making it more likely that responders will treat alerts as meaningful signals rather than background noise. The exam often expects you to connect tuning to reliability, because a security control that causes frequent disruption will be bypassed, and a control that produces constant noise will be ignored. When you can explain false positives as an availability risk, you show the balanced thinking the exam is testing. Signature update cadence and testing are critical because signatures evolve as new attack techniques and variants appear, and pushing updates blindly can introduce new false positives across the environment. Update cadence refers to how often signature sets are refreshed, and in many environments this is frequent, which means change management must be lightweight but real. Testing before wide deployment matters because a new signature that is correct in general can still match legitimate traffic in a particular environment, especially if the environment uses unusual application patterns. A practical approach is to validate signature updates in a limited scope first, observing whether new alerts appear and whether they correlate with expected threat activity before expanding. The exam tends to reward the idea that security updates are still changes that require validation and rollback planning because the control is in the network path and can affect business traffic. When you test signature updates, you reduce the chance of a widespread disruption caused by a rule change that looked harmless in a generic lab. A scenario that shows selective automation is blocking a known exploit targeting a public service, where the attack pattern is well understood and the protected asset is exposed to the Internet. The service receives repeated exploit attempts that match a signature with high specificity, and the organization wants to prevent successful exploitation while remediation and patching are completed. In this case, enabling an automatic block for that specific signature at the edge can reduce risk immediately because it stops the exploit payload before it reaches the vulnerable service. The key is that the rule is narrowly targeted, monitored closely, and validated against normal traffic patterns so legitimate requests are not blocked. Logging should show what is being blocked and how often, providing evidence that the block is preventing attacks rather than disrupting business. This scenario aligns with exam expectations because it demonstrates blocking where confidence is high and the likelihood of attack is real, rather than enabling broad block mode everywhere. A pitfall is enabling all blocks and breaking legitimate business traffic, because a blanket block posture assumes signatures are perfect and assumes traffic patterns are stable and predictable across all services. In reality, many signatures are designed to be conservative in detection mode, and when moved into blocking mode, they can become too aggressive, especially for applications that use unusual inputs or protocols that resemble attack payloads. Breaking business traffic can cause immediate pressure to disable intrusion prevention entirely, which can leave the environment with less protection than it had before the change. The exam often expects you to recognize that block everything is not a mature approach because it ignores the tuning requirement and underestimates the cost of false positives. A safer posture is to block selectively, starting with high-confidence signatures and measuring impact before expanding. When you avoid blanket blocking, you preserve both security and trust in the control. Another pitfall is leaving signatures outdated and missing new attack variants, because attackers evolve and signature coverage can become stale if updates are not applied and monitored. Outdated signatures can miss newer exploit patterns, and they can also fail to detect changes in payload encoding, evasion techniques, and protocol variations. Staleness can also reduce confidence, because teams may assume a control is protecting them while it is actually blind to current threats, creating a dangerous gap between perceived and actual security. The exam expects you to recognize that signature-based systems require maintenance, including regular updates and periodic validation that the system is still detecting relevant threats. Update processes must balance speed and safety, but ignoring updates is rarely defensible, especially for public-facing systems. When signatures are current and tested, the system remains aligned to the threat landscape rather than to last year's attacks. Quick wins include categorizing rules by severity and confidence, because this creates a simple governance model that supports both detection and selective prevention. Severity reflects the potential impact if an exploit succeeds, while confidence reflects how likely a match is to indicate true malicious activity rather than a benign pattern. High severity and high confidence signatures are strong candidates for automatic blocking at appropriate choke points, especially at public edges. High severity but lower confidence signatures may be better kept in alert mode until tuning and validation increase confidence, while low severity signatures may be deprioritized to reduce noise. This categorization approach is exam-friendly because it shows you can prioritize and manage trade-offs rather than treating every signature as equally important. When rules are categorized, tuning decisions become clearer and easier to explain, which supports consistent operations over time. Operationally, recording tuning decisions and reviewing them monthly helps prevent silent drift and ensures that exceptions and suppressions remain justified. Tuning decisions include which signatures were enabled, which were suppressed, which were put into block mode, and why those choices were made, because that context prevents future teams from repeating mistakes. Monthly review cadence is practical because traffic patterns change, applications evolve, and new services appear, which can shift what is noisy and what is meaningful. Reviews also help validate that blocked signatures are still effective and not causing intermittent issues, and that alert-only signatures are still relevant and not producing chronic noise. The exam expects you to recognize that tuning is not a one-time action because environments and threats change continuously. When tuning is documented and reviewed, the intrusion detection and prevention program becomes a managed capability rather than an ad hoc set of toggles. A memory anchor that fits this topic is detect, tune, then selectively prevent, because it captures the safe path from visibility to enforcement. Detect provides the baseline understanding and reveals which signatures are noisy and which are meaningful in your environment. Tune improves signal quality, reduces alert fatigue, and increases confidence in what a match implies, which is necessary before you treat a signature match as grounds for blocking. Selectively prevent applies automation only to high-confidence signatures in high-risk locations, reducing attack success without introducing broad disruption. This anchor is useful for exam questions because many of them effectively ask whether you should alert or block, and the safest reasoning usually involves a detection first and tuning first approach, unless the scenario clearly indicates an urgent, high-confidence exploit pattern. When you use this anchor, you can justify your decision as both security conscious and availability aware.
A prompt-style exercise is choosing which signatures to block automatically, and the correct selection usually favors high-confidence exploit signatures that target exposed services and have low likelihood of matching legitimate traffic. For example, a signature that matches a specific known exploit payload against a particular public service is a strong candidate for blocking at the edge, especially if the service is known to be targeted. A signature that triggers on broad categories like suspicious encoded string may be too noisy and better left in alert mode until tuned for the specific application context. A signature that detects scanning behavior may be blocked if it is clearly hostile and not needed for legitimate use, but it should be validated against internal scanning tools and expected testing patterns to avoid blocking authorized activity. The exam expects you to justify blocking decisions with confidence and impact reasoning, not with a desire to block everything. Practicing this selection builds the ability to automate responsibly. Episode 107 concludes with a practical approach to signatures. Enable broad detection to learn baseline noise. Tune to protect availability and build trust. And then apply automatic blocking only to high-confidence signatures where the security benefit outweighs disruption risk. Signatures are effective at catching known exploit behavior and suspicious payloads, but they require maintenance through regular updates and careful testing to avoid both staleness and sudden false positives. The major pitfalls are blanket block mode that breaks legitimate traffic and neglected updates that miss evolving attack variants, and both can be avoided through categorization, phased rollout, and disciplined review cadence. The tuning decision drill is to take a small set of signatures, classify them by severity and confidence, decide which stay in alert mode and which move to block mode, and narrate what validation and rollback steps you would use before deploying widely. When you can narrate that decision clearly, you demonstrate exam-ready understanding of how signature systems are operated safely in real environments. With that mindset, automation becomes a controlled advantage rather than a source of outages. Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.